you do a really good job of screening for incoming students based on cognitive indicators of success. So you screen by ACT scores, SAT scores, other standardized test scores, prior grade point averages. Basically, if a person is smart enough, they can get in your school. And that's great, and we should do that. However, why are students leaving? We're screening how they're coming in the front door, but they're going out the back door. The research shows that students most often drop out not because of cognitive factors, we've already screened for that, but they leave our programs because of non-cognitive factors. It just was not a good fit for them. It wasn't the right time in their life. There was something about the experience that just was not right for them. And so it's very important that we measure and respond to non-cognitive indicators of student success. So what are non-cognitive indicators? Well, they're things like motivation, procrastination, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, things that define the learner's learning personality. We kind of divide it into three major categories. First of all, we start out looking at the student internally. We call those individual attributes. So those are things like motivation, procrastination, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, things that do define that learner's learning personality. Then we look at the learners, as we're looking at them internally, we look at their dominant learning style. That's based on the multiple intelligences model, so that's whether they're visual, verbal, social, solitary, those things. After we've looked at the learner internally, then we look at the learner externally. We call those life factors. That's like availability of time. Do you have a dedicated place for studying? Support from family, support from employers, health, finances, really an environmental scan of what's going on in the person's life. So after we've looked at the learner internally and we've looked at them externally, then we do a skills test. We measure their technology skills, we measure their on-screen reading skills, we measure their keyboarding skills. So the full assessment is a combination of skills test, individual attributes assessment, and situation and life assessment, with the intention being helping that student going into the online learning or the self-regulated learning environment experience with their eyes wide open about their own traits and attributes and skills so that they're not surprised. Schools spend quite a bit of money to recruit and attract students, and when that student does not complete their program, well, one, you as a school don't get your return on investment, but two, and even more importantly, that student, if they do not complete your program, they're really oftentimes worse off than they were before they enrolled, because now they may have student loans that they have to pay back and they have no additional earning power to help them recoup that. And so what we want to do is provide this as a student service. All schools need students, but they need students who will stay enrolled. And so we want to equip that student and set that student up for success as well as possible so that they can have the best shot possible to stay enrolled in your program. So schools use this assessment in several different ways. One of the most common ways is that they put it in an orientation course. Often in orientation courses we see some very creative things where maybe they will have the students write a 2-page reflective paper on what they thought about their scores. This encourages the students to reflect on their scores, to internalize their scores, and then it also gives the school a very early writing sample of the student's ability. Also in orientation courses, we'll see schools group the students by certain traits or attributes, maybe by learning styles or by level of technology competency. And so that's really helpful to students if they feel like they're isolated, maybe they're the only person who has low technology skills. When they see that there are other students in the course experiencing the same thing, that can be some comfort to that student. In addition to orientation courses, some schools integrate the assessment into their onboarding process. Typically it's done so that an academic advisor or success coach or someone of that nature that's student-facing follows up with the student about their scores, has a conversation with that student about their scores. That's really the best model. As you'll see when you look at the assessment, the score report that we give is very informative. It's very customized to meet the student's needs. Each score report is individualized based on that student's score. But we all know that students don't read unless you make them read. And so when there's someone at the school that's following through with the student scores and talking with them about it, that's really the best of all possible worlds. That's that accountability. One of the features of our assessment engine is on our score report, we give resources for remediation. By default, we provide free web-based resources, but schools can supplement or replace those with their own links. And then our academic advisors or your success coaches, whomever, can actually see if a student followed one of those links to go out and look at those resources for support. So there's an accountability loop there that your academic advisors can use to follow through with a student. One of the best uses of the data that we collect from SmarterMeasure is to enrich that conversation that your academic advisor or your success coach has with a student. So imagine you're an academic advisor and you're meeting with a student. Maybe it's 3 weeks into the term. You see from your LMS metrics that that student's not very well engaged. Maybe they've not done well on their first test. So what do you as an advisor say to that student? Come on, Johnny, you can do better than that. Hang in there. Well, that's encouraging, but that's not really a very in-depth conversation. But when that academic advisor is equipped with the non-cognitive data that we collect about the student, then that enriches that conversation that they have with that student. So they can say, hey, Johnny, I see here that procrastination is an issue that you struggle with. Let's talk about how we set some timelines to better prepare for the next assignment or the next exam is coming up. So the data that we're collecting can be used in a practical way to advise those students to do better. So that's kind of what SmarterMeasure is. It's an assessment that students take to give them better insight, to give their advisors better insight so that they can better coach the students. I'm going to pause here for a moment, and after the pause, I'll share with you some information about SmarterProctoring, but I wanted to see if there are any questions or comments about SmarterMeasure at this point. And I think if you have one, you can walk up to that microphone there in the middle and everyone can hear you.
Also, you can change please mute yourself. Change your voice settings, right-click and go down to voice and click shout, and then you'll be able to be heard by the whole room if you don't want to walk to the microphone.
Joe, I believe you're still on mute. Just hit the M key.
Hi, how you doing, Dr. Adkins?
I'm good, Joe. Good to see you.
I was wondering, your SmarterMeasure research, I know you've compiled a lot of data from that, and you've taken and done reporting based upon that to really find out some interesting facets about students' readiness to learn at a distance. What are some of the big takeaways that you've had from all this big data, if you will, that you've had to analyze? What are some of your takeaways that you've had on students' readiness to learn from the data itself?
Very good. Thanks for asking that question, Joe. And you guys can go to SmarterMeasure.com, and there's a research tab up at the top if you'd like to read in depth about this. On that page, you'll find several white papers and research reports that we've done with schools. Typically, when we do a research project, it takes one of these forms. Very often, schools are curious about the correlations between this non-cognitive data and then key performance indicators of their students. Those KPIs usually fall into one of four categories, which are generally academic success, engagement, satisfaction, or retention. Typically what we find is that of those four KPIs, the one that is the highest correlate with this non-cognitive data is engagement. And so, Joe, if you think about it, the things that we're measuring, motivation, procrastination, availability of time, technical competency, keyboarding skills, all of those things will directly impact how engaged that student is. And now with most schools using very modern advanced learning management systems, they have access to really rich engagement data. Everything from frequency of login, duration of login, length of discussion board posting. So there's often rich data there to quantify engagement that you can correlate back to the non-cognitive variables that we measure. Retention would probably be the second highest, because students for whom online learning or self-regulated learning is a good fit are the students who are most likely to remain in the program. So often we see very good correlations with retention. Satisfaction is kind of difficult data to create a correlation with, because generally schools collect their satisfaction data or their end-of-course survey data anonymously, so we cannot map what student A said on their satisfaction report to how student A did, on our assessment. So we have to kind of look at means and things like that. But we do see that there are trends there that really it's just common sense. Students for whom this is a better fit are the students who are more satisfied. And then probably the fourth strongest correlate is often the one that schools start with first, but that's academic achievement. Many times we don't see super strong correlations between these non-cognitive factors and academic achievement. And while on the surface that may seem to be a negative thing, when you think about it, it's really not. Because academic achievement is influenced by so many different things. First of all, at a lot of our schools, there's a high degree of grade inflation. So we don't have good distribution of scores across that spectrum of A, B, C, D, and F. But when we do see schools that don't have as much grade inflation, then we get better correlations. But then academic success is impacted by such a myriad of variables, everything from the student's own, competencies to the performance of the teacher to the nature of the subject matter. And so often while schools want to start with that correlation of academic success, once they see that the better correlations are with engagement and retention and satisfaction, that kind of directs the degree or the movement that the research takes toward that. So that may or may not answer your question, but I appreciate you asking. Any other questions or thoughts about SmarterMeasure before I move over to SmarterProctoring? Okay, very good. So, SmarterProctoring, it is a very new tool. It's only been out about a year. Last fall is when it was first available. There were 2 schools used it. This past fall then there were 38 schools who used it. So it's growing very rapidly because it's solving a real problem. And here's the business problem that SmarterProctoring was meant to solve. At most schools, historically, you've given students several options of ways to take their high-stakes proctored exams. Those options can include everything from the faculty member himself or herself saying, look, I realize that a lot of my online students are living within the local geographic area, so to save them money, I'm going to go to a computer lab on campus on a Saturday morning, and for all the students that show up, I'll proctor my exam there. So instructor proctored is one mode. A very common mode is that schools operate testing centers. Initially, the purpose of those testing centers were for makeup exams or to give us exams to people who, due to some disability, maybe needed extra time or they needed extra resources. But over the past few years, these testing centers have become very popular places for e-learning students to take their exams. And so the student will go to a testing center, maybe at the institution, or the student may go to a testing center of another school because they live in another city. So testing through a testing center is a second modality. A third modality is that schools may have criteria that an approved proctoring professional may meet. Those criteria may include everything from an HR officer at the company where the student works to an education service officer if they're in the military, or some schools accept things like pastors at churches or high school principals. But it's very often that schools will have criteria that a proctor can meet. but then they send the student out to find someone who meets that criteria. Well, there goes your objectivity. So that's the third mode, is a proctoring professional, an approved proctoring professional. A fourth mode is some type of virtual proctoring. And as you guys know, there's a full spectrum of virtual proctoring tools that are out there. There are companies that do live virtual proctoring, where they have a human sitting on one end of a webcam watching in real time your student take the test. They're monitoring what goes on the student's computer. They're seeing the screen. They're recording everything. That's called live virtual proctoring. And then there are other companies on the other end of the spectrum that do what we call automated virtual proctoring. These are companies that use some sort of computer algorithm to tell, if there's another person's face that showed up on the screen, if there's a change in the lighting, so if they opened a second computer or they opened up their phone. These computer algorithms are becoming really good, and they're really complex at seeing abnormalities that are happening in the testing process. So, you as a school probably want to offer your faculty members and their students several options about the way they take their exam. So here's the problem. Suppose you're a faculty member in an online course, you're teaching 30 students. How do you know which students will be proctoring by what modality? And then the devil is really in the details, because for each modality there's a different workflow. So, for example, if the student's going to come to you as the faculty member when you administer it in a testing lab, do you know who's going to show up? A few years ago when I taught online for a local university, I did that. On a Saturday, I would say I'll be available in the computer lab from 8 in the morning until noon. And if you want to take your proctored exam with me, show up. But I did not have a tool like this, so I did not know who all to expect to show up. So I would get there at 8. Most students would come by about 9:30 or 10. By about 10:30, we were pretty much done, but I had to stay there until noon because I didn't know if anyone else would show up. So, instructor is proctored, they need to know who's coming. If the student's going to be going to a testing center, whether it's at your school or another school, they have to schedule that. And testing centers schedule in a lot of different ways. Some of them have online scheduling. Some of them you have to call. Some of them you have to go by and sign up. They have different policies. Some of them are free to their own students, but they charge for testing for students of other schools. Some testing centers are free for everybody. And so if the student's going to go to a testing center, what's the process for that? And then third, if the student's going to go to an approved human proctor, well, they've got to find somebody that meets the criteria. They've got to get that person to agree to proctor it. Then someone at the school has to call that person and verify that they really are who they say they are, that it's not just a straw man that the student has stood up. And then if they're going to use some virtual technology, they've got to make sure that their computer has enough bandwidth, that their webcam is okay, that they're not going to have technical problems like I did at the beginning of this session. And so you see there's lots of balls that you have to keep in the air in this proctoring process. And at many institutions, the burden of responsibility for juggling all those balls in the air rests with the faculty members. And I don't know about you, but myself included, most faculty members want to be subject matter experts. They want to teach what they know and what they love. They don't want to have to organize a proctoring process. And so it's really a big administrative burden on those faculty. And that's such the case that at many schools we've talked to, they have staff that coordinate this proctoring process. Recently, I was on the campus of a moderately sized, regional state university. They have a rather nice distance learning program, but they have 6 full-time state employees who do nothing but manage the proctoring process full-time. And they do it through a combination of web forms and spreadsheets, and it's still a very manual process. So that's the messy part of distance learning that we said, hey, we need a solution that can clean that up. We need a solution that continues to give the students all of their proctoring modalities, but really organizes this workflow in a way that's not so time-consuming and confusing. So what SmarterProctoring is the very first of its kind, is a Proctoring Process Management System. It's embedded within the LMS, So without ever leaving the course, the student says, hey, I see I've got an assignment here of a proctored midterm or a proctored final exam. They click it. The next screen, they see all of the different choices that you as a school and your faculty members have approved. So they say, oh, here's my choices. I can either go to my local testing center. That's free, but they're only open these hours. Or I can use a proctoring professional, maybe my HR officer at my work, and that's free, but I've got to schedule time to take a half day off work to do that. I'm not sure I want to do that. Or I can use one of these virtual proctoring modalities, but let's look at the cost on that. And I see this one for live virtual proctoring is $25, but here's an automated virtual proctoring, and it's only $14. So I wonder what I'm going to choose. But that student then is a well-informed consumer. If they need the convenience of an automated virtual proctoring system or a live virtual proctoring system that they can start on demand and they're willing to pay for that convenience, then that's an option for them. Or maybe they want to go ahead and schedule for that free option at your local testing center. We give the student the information they need all on one screen to make that informed decision. And then when they make their decision about how they want that test to be proctored, then our system walks the student down a yellow brick road every step of the way about what they need to do to prepare for that proctoring event. Our system is sending them reminders along the way of, hey, your exam is coming up in 3 days. Here's the time that you're scheduled. And so we're helping students avoid that procrastination, helping them to avoid mistakes like I made with this. I had this session on my calendar for 10 o'clock Central. Turns out it was 10 o'clock Eastern. My mistake. Well, for a virtual conference, yeah, that's kind of a bad thing. But what if this was my final exam and it had a deadline and I've waited until the last minute to take it? Well, our system is sending out reminders and prompting students about important details such as time zones and what resources they can have available for their test. So it's really helping that student prepare for the proctoring event. Within the course, the faculty members and the administration also have complete visibility to see how each student is taking their exam and to see where the student is in that process, where they are in that workflow, so that they can be reminding that student, oh, hey, you need to be doing this or you need to be doing that to prevent something, bad happening at the last moment. Another factor or feature of this solution is that we have a growing database. Currently, there's over 3,000 proctoring professionals and testing centers in it, and that database is growing the more schools that sign on. So imagine you're one of those schools that has an approved human proctor, an HR officer, a military service officer, a pastor, whatever your criteria are. You've probably already got a database of 200 or 300 people that meet that criteria. Well, when you start using SmarterMeasure, or SmarterProctoring rather, you'll invite those persons to fill out a profile in our database so that they're available if they choose, not only to your students, but students of other schools. And so that database is growing with every school that signs on. So currently there's over 3,000 approved proctoring professionals. We use a third party to document and to test that these people really are who they say they are, that they're not just a straw man that the student's standing up. And then our system knows the student's zip code. So imagine this. You're a student who wants to use an approved professional. No longer do you have to go out and find somebody who will agree to do that and then have the school approve it. Our system knows the student's zip code, and it's going to show the student on a map, a Google map, here are pre-approved proctors in your area, and then the student can immediately schedule with them. That's so much better than the convoluted process of having to find someone and then having to have the school to approve them. And then once the proctoring event happens, if there's some exceptionality that happens, then the exceptionality report is provided back to the faculty member from within that interface, within the LMS. If they're using a live virtual process like bVirtual uses, where 100% of the testing session is video recorded, then that complete video shows up right there within the LMS so the faculty member can watch that. All of the details that the proctor saw that they typed into the exceptionality report are going to be there. So what SmarterProctoring is a proctoring process management system. We actually don't proctor any of the tests. Many times when we're working a booth, or maybe you saw Smarter Proctoring, you may have immediately thought, oh, they're just another proctoring company. We've already got a proctoring solution. No, that's not at all what we're doing. We're helping your faculty members and your administrators organize that proctoring workflow in a way that has never been available for them to be organized before. So, what does something like that cost? Well, it really depends. If your school is going to be using a high volume of live virtual proctoring through our preferred provider, Be Virtual, then we get a revenue share from that. And if you're doing enough of that, then that covers your licensing costs. So Smarter Proctoring could be free to your institution. So think about the power that that free tool can have to help organize what is this messy process within eLearning. If you're not doing a lot of virtual proctoring, you're still doing a lot of test-centered proctoring or a lot of approved proctoring professionals, then we'll talk with you about what would a license cost for a school of your size for the volume of tests that you do. But those of you who have been our clients with SmarterMeasure know that we as a company, we provide very, very plausible, reasonable pricing. We're a company, that's founded by an academic, that we try to provide really strong resources that are solving problems that academia is having and providing that in a way that's cost effective for you. So, since we got off to a late start, I didn't want to go through the full slide deck. I just kind of wanted to talk about this, and I hope you can sense the passion that I have for it. I'm truly excited about Smarter Proctoring. It's really meeting the needs of a lot of schools, and it's growing rapidly. So I'll pause to see what questions or comments you have about Smarter Proctoring. Hey, Patrick.
How has that been received? I mean, is there a lot of use of that at this point, or what are you? What kind of response are you seeing to it? It just sounds like a great idea, and much needed because of the way proctoring is kind of taking over things. So.
Yeah, good. And in case you couldn't hear Patrick very well, if you're on the other side of the room, he said, what kind of response are we receiving to this idea of a proctoring process management system? I've got to tell you, it's kind of overwhelming, Patrick, because it is meeting such a felt need of schools to organize this process. It's something that hasn't been available to distance learning administrators prior to this, and it's really a kind of a messy part of e-learning. So we started out last fall with just 2 schools using it, and then this most recent, or the fall before last, and then this most recent fall term, there were 38 schools that were using it. This spring, it's going to be even higher than that, so it's growing quite rapidly. It's growing much faster than SmarterMeasure ever did, and we're truly excited about providing it as a service.
Thanks.
Just kind of curious, if you're new to this environment, at least on my keyboard, if you press a 1, that does a wave like that. So let me kind of poll the crowd to sort of see how many of you have a test center at your school that students go to take their exams. Okay, that's pretty much most. How many of you have a process for an approved professional, an HR officer, a pastor, something like that? Okay, a couple of you. How many of you allow your faculty members to proctor their own exams if the students are local? Well, a couple of those. How many of you are using live virtual proctoring? And there's 2 major providers. There's Be Virtual, ProctorU, and Examity. Actually, there's 3. How many of you use a live virtual proctoring? Okay. And how many of you are using really what's the newest addition to the proctoring modalities, and that's an automated virtual proctoring? I don't see as many of that, but that I've got to tell you, that technology is really growing rapidly. It's getting kind of more accepted by schools. I think some faculty members may be slower to buy into it, but the technology is really getting better. there's something that we are actually wrapping up today. This survey is concluding today. It will be our second annual proctoring survey where we survey students, faculty members, test center directors, and proctors about several things about that proctoring experience. If you go to SmarterProctoring.com, you'll see a link to where you can download the report of last year's survey. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to be presenting the results of this year's survey at the International Conference on Academic Integrity. It's going to be out near Albuquerque, New Mexico. There may be someone from your school that's going. Often it's test center administrators that go to that. If that's something of interest to you, you may want to look up that conference. It's the ICAI is what they call that. But we'll be first sharing the results of that survey there, and then after that presentation we'll be publishing this year's results. But basically what we found, we asked students, in what proctoring modality do you feel like you could cheat the most? And they felt like they could cheat the most in that automated virtual proctoring. They said, well, the computer's watching me, but I can get away with stuff. And we said, which one did you feel like it would be the hardest to cheat in? And they said, if my instructor proctored it. And so we also asked the instructors, what do they think about these modalities? And I guess it goes back to, if you want something done right, do it yourself. Faculty members felt like the most secure environment was when they did it themselves, or they did it through a local testing center. So, our technology is getting better, but those local modes of test centers and human proctors are still something that they're going to stay around for a while. So, we feel like that, schools aren't going to wholeheartedly go to automated types of proctoring, that there still needs to be that human element. So that's why our system of a multimodal proctoring management system that lets students easily schedule and lets administrators and faculty members track all of that is really something that will be a useful tool. Any other questions or comments? Patrick's jumping for joy. Okay, so it's about...
It's not that you're finished, Mac. That's not why I'm jumping, but we give away gift cards.
All right. Well, I'll let you come on up and do that then. And I should have clarified, if you're not familiar with this environment, the vendors do have virtual booths up behind us, and someone in our organization or myself will be in there. If you have any questions about what we've chatted about, feel free to come up there. I can have a personal dialogue with you, and then we can set up a time to demonstrate both of these solutions so that you can see what they're like.
Now, I was talking to you, and I was on mute, so you didn't hear a word. Anyway, thanks, Mac. Mac's booth is probably the most staffed of anything here, which is pretty exciting. You can always find somebody to talk to, and they're all very knowledgeable in the products. The exhibitors... Mac, mute yourself there. I'm getting echo. The exhibitors contribute 2 gift cards as part of their participation in the conference, and we award them during their session, so it kind of helps link them directly to it, which is kind of a nice deal. They also help us out in other ways. So really, going to see them, finding out about their products supports the conference and enables us to offer it to you at no charge. Anyway, we have 2 people that have gotten gift cards. What I did was pull down the attendees list during this presentation at a certain point in time. So if you're real late, you probably didn't include it. If you left early, you probably didn't get included. And then I used a random number generator to select the participant. And if you're here but you're not awake, we will pass to an alternate. So anyway, wake yourself up, jump up and down, that kind of thing. Make sure you're still here. Is Cheryl Huff here? Cheryl, are you here? Jump. Yeah, I hear the clapping. I don't see Cheryl jumping. Wherever you are, if she's not here, wait a minute. Let me check, because we'll... Oh, there she is. There she is. Okay, you were off my screen to the side. Cheryl Huff gets one, and let me see if he's here. Jason Vance, are you here? Yep, there you are. Okay. They will be coming to you by email, so please watch for it. I'll forward them to you in a few seconds. Thanks, and